You know that weird little thing that happens in every house? The way things just vanish. Not important things usually. Not your wallet or your keys, although that happens too. I'm talking about the small stuff. The stuff you swear you just had in your hand. A pair of scissors, your favorite coffee mug. A specific fork that just feels right. You tear the place apart for 10 minutes, blame everyone you live with, and then you give up. You use the second best fork instead. You tell yourself it'll turn up, and maybe it does weeks later, in a place you swear you already looked a dozen times. It's a quirk of life, right? Just one of those dumb, unexplainable things that make you feel like you're losing your mind for a second before you move on. That's what I always thought anyway. I even had a joke about it. I'd say the house has a gremlin, and you have to pay a toll of 1 sock per laundry load and a teaspoon a month. It was funny until it wasn't. It all started when I moved into this place. It was an old house, the kind that was probably really nice 60 years ago, but was now just cheap. And I needed cheap. It had good bones, as they say. Solid wood floors that creaked in a way that felt historic, not ominous, and big windows that let in a ton of light. But it also had its share of problems. A faucet in the bathroom that dripped with a rhythm that was just off enough to be maddening, a spot in the living room that was always cold for no reason, and a weird, musty smell in the pantry that no amount of air freshener could kill. Standard old house stuff. I was fine with it. It was mine, at least for the duration of the lease. The first thing to go was the peeler. A stupid, cheap vegetable peeler with a green plastic handle. I was making mashed potatoes and I went to the drawer where I'd put all the kitchen gadgets. I'd just unpacked them the day before. I remembered putting it right there, next to the can opener. But it was gone. I emptied the whole drawer onto the counter. Nothing. I checked the box I'd unpacked them from, thinking maybe it fell back in. Nope. I spent a solid 15 minutes looking for a $1 piece of plastic and metal until I finally gave up and just used a paring knife, which was a huge pain. I was annoyed, but I chalked it up to the chaos of moving. It probably got mixed in with something else and thrown away, it happens. A week later it was a knife, and not just any knife, it was the knife. My good chef's knife, a Wusthof I'd gotten as a gift. It was my baby. I kept it in a separate knife block on the counter. I'd used it to chop onions for a sauce the night before, washed it by hand, dried it, and put it right back in its slot. The next morning, I went to slice a bagel and the slot was empty. My heart just sank. This wasn't a peeler. This was an expensive, beloved tool. I searched everywhere, in every drawer, every cabinet, the dishwasher, even though I never, ever put it in there. I looked in the trash, sifting through coffee grounds and eggshells like a madman. It was gone, just gone. That's when the feeling started to change. It wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was a creeping sense of unease, a violation. How could a 10-inch knife just disappear from a wooden block in the middle of my counter overnight? I live alone. No one else had been in the house. The doors were locked. I started to question myself. Was I sleepwalking? Did I get up in the middle of the night and do something bizarre with it? The thought was terrifying. The idea that my own body, my own mind was betraying me was worse than the idea of a burglar. A burglar you can understand. This was wrong. Over the next month, the pattern continued, but it got weirder. It was exclusively kitchen utensils. A whisk, a measuring cup, the corkscrew from the wine opener. Small things, but things I used. It felt targeted. It felt personal. The house was slowly, methodically disarming my kitchen. My friends thought I was losing it. "Dude, you're just disorganized," Mark told me over the phone. "You'll find it all in a box in 6 months and feel like an idiot." But I knew it wasn't that. I'm not the most organized person, but I'm not a black hole. I know where my things are, or at least I used to. The breaking point came when I decided to fight back. I went to a department store and bought a brand new full set of knives. A big, beautiful block with 14 knives of all shapes and sizes, plus a sharpener and kitchen shears. It was overkill, but it was a statement. I was telling the house, or the gremlin, or whatever the hell it was, that I wasn't going to be beaten. I was taking back control. I unpacked it, washed every single piece, and set it up right in the center of my kitchen counter, a gleaming fortress of stainless steel. It felt good. It felt defiant. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the pipes sounded like a footstep. I kept picturing someone creeping into my kitchen, silently sliding the knives out of the block. I must have drifted off eventually because I woke up to my alarm, my heart pounding. The first thing I did was walk into the kitchen, and I just froze. The counter was empty. The entire block, the heavy wooden base, all 14 knives, the sharpener, the shears, was gone. Not a single knife left behind. The whole entire 20-pound block of wood and steel had vanished without a trace, and all I could do was stand there, in the cold morning light, staring at the empty space where it used to be, and the only sound was the maddening, offbeat dripping of the faucet in the bathroom. For a long time I didn't move. I just stood there in my silent kitchen, staring at the empty patch of countertop. My brain was doing this weird gymnastics routine, trying to find a logical reason, any reason at all for what I was seeing. A prank? Who would do that? My landlord is a 70-year-old woman who lives 2 states away. I don't know my neighbors. My friends don't have a key. Did I have a guest over and forget? No. I live a pretty solitary life. The silence in the house was deafening, and my own thoughts were screaming. Finally, some frantic energy took over, and I tore the place apart. I'm not talking about a casual search. I mean a full-blown manic ransacking of my own home. I pulled every pot and pan out of the cabinets, thinking maybe I'd put it in there for some insane reason. I checked under the sink, behind the fridge, inside the oven. I went through the entire house, room by room. I looked in my closet, under my bed, in the shower. I even went down into the damp, spider-infested basement, armed with my phone's flashlight, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was expecting to see it sitting in a dark corner, a bizarre monument to my own insanity. But there was nothing, just dust, old paint cans, and the smell of wet earth. The whole time, a single, terrifying question was looping in my head. Did I do this? The sleepwalking theory was no longer a vague worry, it was a horrifyingly plausible explanation. Had I woken up, possessed by some strange compulsion, and hauled a 20-pound block of knives out of my own house? If so, where did I put it? I checked outside. I walked the perimeter of my yard in my pajamas, scanning the bushes, the garbage cans. I must have looked like a lunatic to anyone watching. I imagined myself zombie-like, heaving it into a dumpster 3 blocks away, or burying it in the park. The thought made me feel sick. To be a stranger to your own actions is a special kind of hell. I needed to talk to someone. I called my girlfriend, Sarah. I tried to sound casual, but my voice was trembling. "Hey, weird question," I started. "You didn't sneak into my house last night and steal my new knife block as a really weird joke, did you?" There was a pause on the other end. "What are you talking about, Leo?" I tried to explain, and the more I talked, the crazier I sounded. I could hear it myself. The story was absurd. A whole knife block just vanishing. Her tone shifted from confusion to genuine concern. "Leo, are you okay? You sound stressed. Did you misplace it?" That word, misplace, it was like a hot poker. Misplace it? "Sarah, it's a giant block of wood and steel. It weighs 20 pounds. How do you misplace that?" The conversation devolved from there. She thought I was having some kind of breakdown from the stress of the move. She suggested I see a doctor. She didn't believe me. Not really, and I couldn't blame her. I hung up the phone feeling more alone than ever. She wasn't my partner in this mystery. She was just another person who thought I was losing my grip on reality. And the worst part was, I was starting to think she was right. That evening, the house felt different. The comforting creaks of the floorboards now sounded like footsteps. The draft in the living room felt like a cold breath on my neck. I was a prisoner in a place that was actively messing with me, or worse, a prisoner in my own mind. I did the only thing I could think of. I went full detective on the house itself. I checked every single window lock, twice. I examined the deadbolts on the front and back doors. There were no signs of forced entry. No scratches on the frames, no jimmy marks on the locks. Everything was secure. Whoever or whatever was doing this wasn't breaking in. It was already inside. Or it was me. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to force myself to stay awake, I heard it for the first time. It was a faint sound, easy to miss if you weren't listening for it. a soft, rhythmic scraping. It sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was slow, deliberate. My blood ran cold. I held my breath, straining to hear it more clearly. It sounded like metal on wood, or maybe fingernails on drywall. It lasted for maybe a minute, then stopped. I told myself it was the pipes or mice. Old houses make noises. It had to be that. But I knew it wasn't. It was a new sound, and it felt connected somehow. It was the sound of the house digesting. Over the next few days, I became obsessed. I started setting traps. I'd leave a specific coin on the kitchen counter and take a picture of it before bed. In the morning, it would still be there. I left a book, a sock, a glass. Nothing. It only wanted my kitchen tools. It had a specific appetite. The scraping sound would come and go, never staying long enough for me to pinpoint its exact location. Sometimes it was in the kitchen wall, other times it seemed to be coming from the ceiling upstairs. It was toying with me. I was living in a state of constant low-grade terror. I was barely eating, barely sleeping. I was starting to look as haunted as I felt. I knew I couldn't go on like this. The not knowing was the worst part. I needed proof. I needed to see it happen. An idea began to form in my mind, an idea born of desperation. I was going to watch. I was going to set a trap it couldn't resist, and I was going to catch it in the act. My plan was simple. I was going to give the house exactly what it wanted, but this time I'd be watching. I went to a kitchen supply store, the same one where I'd bought the now vanished block, and I bought one single, beautiful, expensive chef's knife. It felt heavy in my hand, perfectly balanced. It was a work of art. It was also the perfect bait. Then I went to an electronics store and bought a small, high-definition, motion-activated camera, the kind people use to see what their pets are doing all day. The clerk asked if I was trying to catch a package thief. I just nodded and said something vague. How could I tell him I was trying to catch a ghost or a gremlin or a tear in the fabric of reality that had a fetish for cutlery? He'd have called security. I got home and set it all up with the deliberate precision of a bomb squad technician. I placed the knife dead center on the kitchen counter, right on top of a white dish towel so it would stand out. I positioned the camera on top of the refrigerator, aiming down, capturing the entire counter, the kitchen entrance, and a corner of the living room. It had a wide-angle lens. Nothing could get to that knife without being seen. I connected it to my laptop, checked the live feed. The picture was crystal clear. The knife gleamed under the kitchen lights. It looked lonely, vulnerable. That night was the longest of my life. I didn't even try to sleep. I just lay in bed with my laptop open, watching the live feed of my own empty kitchen. Every shadow seemed to move. Every flicker of a car's headlights passing outside made my heart leap into my throat. The house was quiet for hours, deathly quiet. It knew I was watching. I was sure of it. The scraping sound didn't happen. It was a new kind of psychological torture. The anticipation was a physical weight on my chest. Sometime around 3 a.m., my eyes were getting heavy and I must have dozed off for a while because I woke up with a jolt, the laptop still warm on my chest. The screen showed the kitchen, now bathed in the pale gray light of dawn. I squinted at the screen. The counter was empty. The white dish towel was there, but the knife was gone. A wave of ice-cold dread and strangely exhilarating vindication washed over me. I wasn't crazy. It really happened. And I had it on camera. I didn't even get out of bed. I just grabbed the laptop, my hands shaking, and navigated to the recorded files. The camera had logged several motion-activated events throughout the night. My heart pounded as I clicked on the first one. It was just a moth fluttering around a light fixture. The next one was the shadow of a tree branch swaying outside the window. I skipped through them, my frustration growing, and then I saw one labeled 4:17 a.m. I clicked play. The footage showed me. I was standing in the kitchen, squinting in the dim light. I opened the fridge, took out a bottle of water, took a long drink, and then put it back. I walked out of the frame. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds, but the crucial part was this. When I walked into the kitchen, the knife was clearly visible on the counter. When I left, It was still there. I scrubbed forward. Nothing. For hours, the kitchen was still. I fast-forwarded through the rest of the night, right up until the sun came up. The knife was always there. It made no sense. I had seen the empty counter with my own eyes on the live feed. Had the camera malfunctioned? In a last-ditch effort, I went back to the 4:17 a.m. clip and decided to watch it in real time, second by second. I watched myself get the water. I watched myself leave. The knife sat there, gleaming. I kept watching the still empty kitchen after I left. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes. At 4:19 and 31 seconds, the knife was on the counter. At 4:19 and 32 seconds, it was gone. I replayed that 1 second of footage over and over again. And over. There was no glitch, no distortion, no blur of movement, no hand reaching into the frame. Nothing. The knife was simply there in one frame, and in the very next frame, it had vanished. It didn't slide away. It wasn't pulled away. It just ceased to be. It was an edit in reality, a deletion. And the camera, my objective, unblinking witness, had recorded it perfectly. I felt the floor drop out from under me. This was so much worse than a ghost. A ghost is a person, a presence. It follows rules, however strange. This was a fundamental violation of the laws of physics. This was the universe having a seizure in my kitchen. The proof I had so desperately wanted wasn't a key to solving the mystery. It was a confirmation that the mystery was unsolvable. The world I thought I knew, the one with cause and effect, with solid objects that don't just wink out of existence, wasn't real. I was living in a place where the rules didn't apply. I closed the laptop. I finally got out of bed and walked into the kitchen. I stood where the knife had been and I touched the empty dish towel. It was cold. And then I heard it, louder than ever before. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was coming from the wall right behind me. And this time I swear it almost sounded like a chuckle. The video changed everything. Before, there was always a sliver of doubt, a tiny voice in my head that said, this could all be a product of stress, a psychological break. But the camera doesn't have a psyche to break, it just records what's there. And what it recorded was impossible. So I stopped fighting my own sanity. I accepted it. I was living in a haunted house. Except it wasn't haunted by a person, it was haunted by a principle. A glitch. And the only clue I had, the only thing that felt real and tangible in this whole nightmare, was the sound. The scraping. I stopped trying to explain it. I stopped trying to ignore it. I started hunting it. My life ground to a halt. I called in sick to work, telling my boss I had a stomach flu that wouldn't quit. My phone buzzed with texts from Sarah and my friends, but I ignored them. They were part of a world that didn't matter anymore, a world where things made sense. My world had shrunk to the four walls of this house and the sound that lived inside them. I became a creature of pure instinct, a predator stalking its prey through the hallways. I would spend hours with my ear pressed against the drywall, motionless, barely breathing, just listening. The sound was clever. It moved. 1 hour it would be in the floorboards beneath my feet. The next it would be whispering from the attic above. But it was most active in the kitchen. It always came back to the kitchen. And after 3 days of this obsessive, silent hunt, I finally cornered it. The sound wasn't just in the kitchen, it was in the pantry. A small walk-in closet off the kitchen with deep shelves and a perpetual smell of dust and old wood. I stood inside, closed the door and plunged myself into darkness. And there it was, clear as day. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was coming from the back wall, right at shoulder height. It wasn't loud, but in the tight enclosed space it was everything. It was the sound of a secret being kept. I stood there for what felt like an hour, just listening to that slow, rhythmic sound, feeling it vibrate through the wall and into my bones. And then a new feeling rose up in me, something that wasn't fear or confusion. It was rage. A hot, blinding rage at this thing, this house, for what it had done to me, for isolating me, for making me question my own mind, for stealing my sense of safety in the world. I was done being the victim. I was done listening. I burst out of the pantry and went to the basement, grabbing the heaviest tool I could find, an old rust-pocked claw hammer left behind by a previous tenant. I walked back into the pantry, my heart hammering with a furious energy. I didn't hesitate. I swung the hammer with all my might, smashing it into the spot where the sound was coming from. Plaster exploded inwards. The scraping stopped instantly. A profound silence fell over the house. I had its attention. With frantic energy, I tore at the wall. I smashed and clawed and ripped, pulling away chunks of plaster and splintered wooden laths. Dust filled the small space, choking me, but I didn't care. I was digging, I was excavating, and then my fingers hit something hard and hollow. I pulled away one last large piece of the wall, and there it was. A cavity. A dark, secret space between the walls. My phone's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and what I saw made the air freeze in my lungs. It was them. All of them. My peeler, my whisk, my Wüsthof chef's knife. And there, in the center of it all, was the entire knife block, resting on its side, the remaining slots empty like a grin with missing teeth. But they weren't just thrown in there. They were arranged. My knives were embedded in the old soft wood of the house's frame, stuck in a bizarre spiraling pattern, like the arms of a galaxy. The peeler and the whisk were hanging from old nails I couldn't see, and they were all coated in a strange, dark, sticky-looking residue. It was the color of rust, but it had an organic sheen to it like dried blood or sap. And there were other things too, things that weren't mine. A single, elegant silver earring, a tarnished army dog tag, a small porcelain doll's hand, broken off at the wrist, a set of old-fashioned brass keys tied together with a faded red ribbon. This wasn't a dumping ground, it was a nest, a shrine, a hoard collected over decades. The house hadn't been throwing things away, it had been bringing them here, to its heart. I reached in, my hand trembling, and touched the handle of my chef's knife. The dark residue was cool and slightly tacky. As I pulled my hand back, I realized the silence in the house was no longer a lack of noise. It was a presence. It was the silence of a bated breath. The house knew I had found its secret, and it was waiting to see what I would do now. I stood there in the dusty, cramped pantry, my flashlight beam illuminating the house's secret museum. My heart was no longer pounding with fear or rage. It was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm of disbelief. I had my answer. I wasn't crazy. There was no burglar. It was the house, all of it. The thought was so immense, so fundamentally insane, that it looped back around to being calm. My mind just couldn't handle the sheer scale of the madness, so it stopped trying. I reached back into the cavity, my movements slow and deliberate now. I pushed aside the doll's hand and the old keys, and my fingers brushed against something else at the very bottom, buried under decades of dust. It was a book. A small leather-bound journal, the cover warped and stained by time and damp. I pulled it out. The leather was so brittle it felt like it might crumble in my hands. With a strange sense of reverence, I carried it out of the pantry and into the kitchen, sat down at the table and opened it. The pages were yellow and fragile, and the handwriting inside was a looping, elegant cursive, faded but still legible. The first entry was dated 1958. It was written by a woman named Eleanor Vance. She was the first tenant after the original family built the house. Her first few entries were normal, full of hope about her new home. And then the pattern began. October 12th, 1958. A funny thing happened today. I seem to have lost my silver thimble. I know I left it in my sewing basket, but it simply vanished. I do hope it turns up. It was a gift from my mother. I felt a chill run down my spine. I kept reading. The entries grew more and more frantic. She lost a favorite fountain pen, a pair of heirloom pearl earrings, a small silver letter opener. She wrote about her growing paranoia, her fear that she was becoming forgetful, just like her mother. And then she wrote about the sounds, a soft, scratching sound in the walls, like a mouse, she'd first thought. But the sound grew more insistent. June 3rd, 1959. The scratching no longer sounds like a mouse. It sounds hungry. It is a lonely sound. I feel it in my bones. I am so terribly alone here, and I fear I am going mad. I spoke to the doctor and he gave me pills for my nerves. They do not stop the noise. I turned the page, my breath catching in my throat. The handwriting on the next entry was shaky. Terrified. July 21st, 1959. I know the truth now. I dropped a spoon behind the stove, and when I reached for it, my hand found a loose board. Behind it, there is a space. A hollow. And inside, oh God. Inside are my things. My pen, my earrings, my thimble. They are stuck to the wood, like flies in a web. It is not a ghost. It is the house. The house takes. It is lonely. It wants to keep things. It wants pretty things, useful things. It wants pieces of us to hold in its heart. But the final entries were the most terrifying. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange, calm resignation. September 9th, 1959. I have made my peace with it. I have come to an understanding. It is not malicious. It is simply a collector. When the scratching begins, I know it is hungry. It desires something new. Yesterday, I left it a small mother-of-pearl button from my Sunday coat. I placed it gently inside the hollow. The scratching stopped. The house was quiet. It was content. I am its keeper now. We will take care of each other. I closed the journal. The sun was streaming through the kitchen window, but the room was cold. I finally understood. The previous tenants, the ones before me, they must have never found the nest. They just moved out thinking the house was weird or that they were unlucky. But Eleanor, she understood. She had forged a relationship with this place, a symbiotic, horrifying pact. And now it was my turn. The house was silent, utterly silent. The oppressive feeling was gone, but it was replaced by a heavy, expectant stillness. It had shown me its secret. It had shared its history. The scraping had stopped because I had found the hoard, and now it was waiting. I stood up, walked to the main kitchen drawer and opened it. I bypassed the forks, the cheap knives I had left, and my hand closed around a simple, clean teaspoon. It was shiny. It had a pleasing weight. I had used it for my coffee just yesterday morning, in another lifetime. I walked back to the pantry, to the hole in the wall. I knelt down. I didn't feel scared anymore. I felt a strange sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim in a horror story. I was a character who had just been given his role. I reached into the cavity and gently placed the teaspoon amongst the other treasures, nestled right beside Eleanor's tarnished thimble. It was my first offering, and as my fingers retreated, I felt it. A subtle shift in the very air of the house, a deep, inaudible sigh of contentment that seemed to emanate from the wooden frame itself. The cold spot in the living room was gone. The musty smell in the pantry faded. The house felt peaceful. I am its keeper now. I don't know if I'll ever leave. I don't think it will let me. But the strange thing is, I don't think I want to. We will take care of each other.
If you enjoyed this creepy story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more chilling tales every week. Stay spooky!